Good evening, everyone. Good evening, welcome. Buonasera.
Buonasera.
Buonasera. Lovely to see you all here this evening. It's my pleasure to say a few words at the very start of this event. So the first thing that I will do is just check in on safety. There are no scheduled tests of the fire alarms in this building this evening. So if it does sound, we will follow instructions from our safety steward, which is Velvet, sitting here at the front. But we'll be exiting via the doors, back and front, and the designated meeting point is at the Anatomy Yard, glamorously titled, which is actually next to the Print Room Cafe. So you just go along Mallet Place under the arch by the Print Room Cafe. That is our assembly area. We are recording part of the event this evening to let you know. If you've got any queries at all, Velvet is here. Please do speak to her. She will be here throughout the event. Safety moment done. I'm Jacqui Glass. I'm the Dean of the Bartlett. And it is customary for the Dean to say a few words at the start of any inaugural lecture. We have, however, this evening, a double bill for you. We have two speakers, of Marcella and Sani. What I'd like to do first of all then is introduce Marcella to you. We will then hear from her. She's going to make a presentation. We'll then move straight on to Sani. I'll introduce her. And then at the end, we will have chance for a few questions and answers. Well, questions, it's up to you if you would like to give answers. Of course, you may be very tired by that point. But after that, you will have a chance for refreshments and for informal conversations. So I do hope that you enjoy the evening. Now, Marcella, you are Professor, as of last year, of Healthy and Sustainable Buildings at our Institute for Environmental Design and Engineering, IEDE, where you're also Deputy Director of Academic Operations. Now, like me, you graduated in architecture, but you did it from a much more illustrious place in Naples, very sunny as well, beautiful. So you came to the Bartlett and undertook your MSc and PhD here. And I think, you know, your history, where you've come from, we will see in the work, the examples you're going to show us this evening. I always think with professorial lectures, we can see the applicant, the candidate has reached the moment in their career where everything makes sense at last. Marcella researches how buildings should be designed. Not necessarily how they are designed, upgraded and managed in order to support health and well-being. Like many colleagues in the Bartlett, inequalities are part of what you do, and it's on your mind, which is fantastic to see. We appreciate that. You led the development and launch of the new MSc for Health, Wellbeing and Sustainable Buildings, which is really popular. And it's setting a really important precedent in how we educate on healthy buildings. But you've been very active outside of the academy as well, being a chair and now vice chair of the UK Indoor Environments Group, and you co-chair the Health and Wellbeing Working Group in SIBSI. And I'm sure there are many members or affiliates of SIBSI here this evening. What's really important for me is that you're also active on an all-party parliamentary group as well. So your voice is influencing policymakers, and that's really important and something that we really value as professors. It's something that we really find important. My takeaway though, Marcella, from your work, two things. First of all, people are at the centre of everything that you do. You undertake your work with a great sense of purpose and with a personal passion and a tremendous commitment to quality and impact. Second point is, I've worked with you closely when you were Director of Research, and I remember very vividly the conversations, the voice that you brought to our research advisory group meetings. You were very inspirational to myself and other people, so I'm very grateful for that. Marcella's talk tonight is entitled Healthy Buildings, the Missing Link for a Sustainable Future. So she's going to reflect on some examples from her work. She's going to share a few things with you. And I noticed interdisciplinarity is going to be part of that, as we may expect. So please, prego, please welcome Professor Marcella Ucci.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes. Hello and welcome, and thank you so much, Jackie, for such an amazing introduction and also mentioning a few things that I will also mention in a moment. It's a true pleasure to see each and every one of you. Today I will talk about my research trajectory. I will provide some examples of past and current research and activities. And in doing so, I will provide reflections on the synergies and tensions between healthy buildings and sustainability. And I also hope to provide insights on the importance of interdisciplinary approaches and understandings of indoor environmental quality in buildings, as well as the importance of embedding health and well-being in sustainable buildings for both policy and practice. So one of the themes tonight is this tension or synergies and unintended consequences of trying to design and operate buildings and health, as well as net zero, low energy, sustainability, etc. So some things work together, some things don't quite, and some others work against each other. And trying to understand which is which and how do we evaluate it and how do we address it is fundamental to society today. So as Jackie mentioned, this is taken from my profile on the website. Of course, I've written it myself. So this is my kind of vision statement for now. So I research how buildings should be designed, upgraded and managed in order to support health and well-being, tackle inequalities and reduce environmental impacts. But how did I get to this agenda and why is this agenda important today? So the beginning. So this is a picture of a house dust mite, and it will become clearer in a moment because it was effectively my first proper research job at UCL. But of course, before then, I've always had an interest in environmental design, bioarchitecture and sustainability, and I did graduate in architecture in Naples. I then did an MSc in environmental design and engineering at the then Bartlett School for Graduate Studies, and I graduated in 2003, so quite a little bit a while ago. Soon after graduated, I did a small research job in collaboration with the department, who at the time was advising building regulations on ventilation, mold and dust mites. And then this opportunity came up to apply, and I was successful in being awarded a research contract for 2 years on a very snappily titled project, the psychometric control of house dust mites, validation of a combined agrothermal population model. So this project was funded by the EPSRC, and effectively it was a continuation of an initial project. The original project was the development of the model, and this project, where I was involved in, was about the validation and further development and application of a model. The model was about understanding how building design and occupant behavior could affect the infestation of house dust mites in mattresses in housing. Now, house dust mites, these little things there, you can't actually see them with the naked eye. They're very small, almost translucent. They feed on human skin scales. They thrive in warm and humid environments, and they tend to be in carpets, mattresses, soft toys, etc. They produce an enzyme in their poo, largely, to which some people are allergic. And the exposure to the allergen can then exacerbate or even cause problems such as asthma, allergic rhinitis, and eczema. So the project itself was led by Professor Tajoreshin, who was then the head of the department and also became my PhD supervisor, because I decided to then do a PhD at the same time. And as you may be able to see, it was a multidisciplinary collaboration of architects, building scientists, acarologists, and so on. The background to the project was the rise in asthma and allergies worldwide, including in the UK. And some people believe that some of these could be due to increased environmental exposures to allergens and others. And in some cases that this could be exacerbated by energy efficiency in buildings because of greater air tightness, and so the buildup of indoor pollutants. So the project itself was trying to understand to what extent should we or could we trade off ventilation to try and reduce moisture accumulation health and comfort, and ideally prevent exposure to happen in the first place, rather than having to then tackle health problems later on. But what did I do in the project? So this was a validation of a model. So by and large, one of the large amount of work that I did together with my colleague who was an acarologist, we went in the field. So we created these, we call them live mite cages or tea bags, because they did look like tea bags. Each tea bag had a known number of live dust mites together with a certain amount of food. They were sealed. It was water permeable fabric, and we installed them in real mattresses. This is my mattress, together with loggers that monitor temperature and relative humidity. After 6 weeks, we retrieved the cages. The acarologists would count how many live mites were retrieved, how much allergen was left, and we would then compare these with the predictions of the model. We could then use the model in combination with typical building performance simulation tools such as Energy Plus or TAS to try and understand whether, let's say, if we have a base case flat and we add mechanical ventilation with heat recovery, we add ventilation, etc., to what extent the ape population in the mattress might increase, let's say by 10%, 20%, or reduce, in fact. But the project was a lot more, because it really gave me my first real exposure as an architect to multi and interdisciplinary research. So I used to take the minutes of the meeting, and one of the agenda action every single time in the minutes was reminders for the males member of the team. We were polite not to remind the females to leave, to bring their beard shavings to the next meeting, because our acarologists used to use the beard shavings together with real natural dust, as well as cod liver and all sorts, to feed their colony of dust mites, because we want them to feed on a natural diet. So we could have opened a restaurant for dust mites. We then also collaborated with an artist called Angela Palmer, who won an award for her piece, See No Evil, that then she donated to the department. This was about, again, respiratory conditions, and it does look like a window, because effectively it's 2 glass panes, and in between it's sandwiched the known number of mites, which at the time were believed to be the threshold for sensitization, although this is debated. And last but not least, I was fortunate enough, together with other members of the team, including Professor Dejan Mumovic, to be involved in the Channel 4 Dispatches documentary, How to Beat Your Kids' Asthma. So the idea there was to follow kids and their families, kids who had allergies to environmental factors such as dust mites or pets, and trying to test the idea of allergen avoidance. So they were advised by doctors and nurses on how to reduce their exposure, for example, by cleaning, etc. And we, the scientists, the built environment scientists, were going around their homes, doing air pressurization tests, monitoring their conditions, and then providing advice. Hopefully, you can recognize me in that picture, although it was a little while ago, and you will see that I'm wearing a lab coat. So we were told that the scientists needed to be distinguished by the other characters in the documentary. So we were given a choice, either wear a colorful fleece or a lab coat. So we chose the lab coat, and this has been the only time I wore a lab coat in my life, because I don't go around people's houses doing field work with a lab coat. So first reflection from this first phase. So the importance of metrics, because of course, for example, the model that we had developed could tell us, okay, if you have, I don't know, 100,000 dust mites here, and you do this and that to the building, it increases by 10% or decreases by, 10%. But we didn't have the immediate connection then to the health outcome. At the same time, we could say, okay, on the other hand, the building model is telling us that the energy increase is X kilowatt hour of X amount of carbon. Well, how do you trade these two things? And this was really quite important, because then when you're trying to influence policy, that was a problem. And the other problem was, because that was my very first conversation with a policymaker about this project, I was so excited. And he told me, yes, but a home is an Englishman's castle, and we don't really want to regulate homes, but that's a different story. And of course, you will have seen that multi and interdisciplinary research was really started to be the core of my interest. But I also started to become interested in the role of behavior in terms and design, because of course my kind of formation was about design as architecture, but I became more and more interested about how these two interact to create environments that affect exposure and health. So soon after my PhD, I was successful in applying for a lecturer job in the same department. This was in a slightly different team, the facility and environment management team. So my focus shifted slightly from design to management, and also from domestic to non-domestic buildings. But I continue my interest in behavior and behavior change. So this is an extract from one of the first projects that I worked in after being a lecturer. So this was funded by the Technology Strategy Board and EPSRC, and it was a collaboration between industry and academia. The program that funded this work was called User-Centered Design for Energy Efficiency in Buildings. So as you probably can see, there was not so much health and well-being in the focus, but there was more on behavior and energy. And the idea that the test bed in our case was a factory environment. So it was a factory that produced brakes for locomotive industry. And so the idea here was, how can we create engaging prompts about energy use that can persuade people in the factory, for example, to switch off the light. Incidentally, this was my first and last for now experience of a research summit. Those of you who are not familiar with that, it means, there's a call, you apply for it, then if you're successful, you're invited to 2 or 3 days residential, where you do all sorts of painful icebreakers exercises, and then you create teams. And as part of these teams, you then create a research idea. Then on the last day, you pitch the idea, and those that are successful are invited to develop the full-on application, and we were funded. And this was an amazing experience, in part also because it did bring together very diverse interests. One of our collaborators has her academic expertise, dance. So I will say no more. But in fact, my interest in kind of all sorts of things continued. I wanted to mention one project that was not funded, but I thought it was great fun. The title, Cool and Green, to start with. It was starting on the premise of what was happening in Japan at the time. They had introduced limits on cooling set points in public buildings. And they also realized that they had to find ways to persuade people to relax their dress code in the workplace. So they had, for example, their then prime minister appear in public wearing, no tie and short sleeves, etc., as a way of supporting this campaign, which was about energy security, perhaps more than energy efficiency. The proposal then was, okay, if there were cooling set points in the UK, what could this be? Because in Japan it's 28, but in the UK it wouldn't be as high as that. And then what sort of weird and wonderful clothing could we develop for that? It wasn't funded, sadly, yet, but I did embed some of these ideas in the first PhD student work that I supervised. And this was looking at AC air conditioning limits in offices in the UK. So she was looking at, for example, surveying facility managers to understand the sort of barriers. And then she recruited some buildings where she was comparing 2 floors. On one floor, after baseline, there would be an increase in the thermostat setting in summer. And we were trying to see whether there would be an impact of using social norms to introduce this change. So social norms, smiley face, everyone is accepting on this idea or something like that. But I want to say that the biggest challenge on the project ended up being the fact that although these were very modern air-conditioned buildings, there was always a difference between the floors to start with, although in theory there shouldn't have been based on the thermostat setting. And then when, the building management system, through the building management system, there was an increase in temperature, well, that temperature wasn't what we were expecting. So this is a reminder of, we design buildings in one way, what they do in reality isn't quite what we expect. And it therefore is also a reminder that when we use building performance modeling, where we can do all sorts of weird and wonderful things in the model, we need to really understand to what extent that can be translated in practice. And then another project was the Active Buildings project. This was funded by the School for Public Health Research. So it was led by the late Professor Jane Wardle at UCL and Professor Alexi Marmot, and I was a co-investigator. So it was a collaboration between building scientists, health psychologists, and physical activity experts. The background to this was the rise in obesity worldwide, and some of it could be attributed to the physical as well as the food environment that discourages us from engaging in physical activity. And of course, physical activity has a number of benefits for health, aside from the links with obesity itself. But the project was looking at office buildings layout. So in simple terms, was about understanding to what extent the relative distribution of workstations on a floor space may affect sitting, walking, and standing behavior in an office environment. So we recruited, it was an observational study. We recruited a number of buildings, including UCL buildings. We then gave participants an accelerometer that they had to wear on their thigh for about 7 days, 24/7. And in a subset, we also gave them an RFID tracking, a radio frequency ID tracking, which is a similar technology to the Oyster card, to see where they were located in the building. So were they most of the time at their desk or, you know, elsewhere. We then calculated a number of spatial metrics for each building, which was trying to characterize in simple terms, the distance between the participant workstation and other people's desks, you know, other printers, etc., as well as the visibility of other workstation. And what did we find? We're the opposite of what we were expecting. So the logic may dictate that the further away things are, the more people have to walk. But in fact, we found an inverse association. They were inversely correlated. So the greater the step count, the smaller the distance, and vice versa. And also inversely correlated the number of steps accumulated during work hours and the number of workstation visible when standing. So we deduced that there might be compensatory effects. So for example, if things are very far away from my desk, I might decide to do one trip and then go, you know, to the toilet, to the tea printer, etc. And also that there might be a social surveillance effect. So if lots of people can see me walking around, they might be thinking I'm not actually working, so I might stay sitting more than otherwise. But I should emphasize that the effect size was very small, so it was quite small. It had no clinical implication, really. And on the other hand, could be slightly related to the type of buildings that we recruited, because not many were kind of deep plan. So reflection 2. I started to really ponder about the importance of the social environment. You know, I started my training as architect, kind of physical environment, behavior, but then the social environment and how these interacts with the physical environment to create the conditions that really determines potentially our health and well-being was very important. And size does matter in the sense that in a lot of the projects that I've been involved with, the built environment factors taken individually, they have relatively small effect sizes, right? And so if one has the tendency of looking for the silver bullet, it's quite hard to find that silver bullet. But if we then consider the combination, right, of factors and their synergies or working against each other, that's where we have the greatest opportunities for leverage. And then, of course, the research that I did during that phase wasn't so much about energy. So, of course, exposure to different funding bodies. I could not mention my career without mentioning, of course, the MSc Health, Wellbeing and Sustainable Buildings, which I played a leading role in kind of developing and then launching, and I was program lead for 2 years. It's going really strong still, and I should say it's a real pleasure to see, you know, lots of our graduates doing all sorts of amazing things. I can see some of you in the audience today, and you know, researchers really go on about research and impact, but the impact that we can accrue through our teaching and through our graduates in society is probably bigger, and the satisfaction is a lot greater at times. When we launched this MSc, of course, we consulted with a number of people to try and understand the scope, etc. So a big thank you to Professor Derek Clemens-Chrome, who was the external examiner advising us on the time. But we consulted more broadly, and some of the things that they told us was, well, you could have an entire MSc on healthy buildings. You don't have to have the sustainability in the title or in the focus. But we decided against it for two reasons. One, we felt it was too niche. And to some extent, it could still be the case today. A lot of our graduates, or several of our graduates, find jobs in sustainability teams within consultancy or design. There aren't a lot of jobs yet, I should hasten to say, that just say, you know, healthy buildings design. But the other reason was that we really wanted to give our graduates a grounding in, you know, healthy buildings, understanding though the links with sustainability. And incidentally, this MSc came about literally by me sending an email to Professor Mike Davis, who was then the director of IED, saying, oh, Mike, I think we should launch a new MSc in healthy buildings, because I see a lot of interest. You know, there is the launch of the Well Building Standard, there's been the development of the World Green Building Council. And it's a great idea, Marcella. You set up a working group and get going. So I'm trying to learn. I don't always apply that, not to always have great ideas, or at least, you know, say, I'm not volunteering unless I want to do it, which this was a great experience. And one of the reasons why it was a great experience, besides, of course, working with the students, is that I had to become an ambassador of the MSc and therefore of the field. And this also pushed me beyond some of my existing boundary of research, for example, biophilic design, which is of great interest to a lot of our students. And for example, I also then did a collaboration, a very brief collaboration with Daiwa Can Design on their biophilic living lab in the Shard in London. But I have continued, of course, my work on indoor air quality. For example, looking at the impact of different types of pollutants and ventilation on cognitive performance through lab or kind of field work, as well as the role of, for example, NO2 and filtration. And so the importance of indoor air quality continues to be a strong focus in my work and across all aspects of not just health, but well-being. But in the latter part of my career, I'm nearly done, by the way. In the latter part of my career, I've become more and more interested again, I should say, in housing and inequalities. And of course, this came at the time when COVID hit. We were all stuck indoors in our homes, and the importance of homes became even more apparent to everybody. And there was a lot of research that was showing how housing and the built environment was a significant social determinant of inequalities in terms of COVID outcomes, and not only. And there's been a lot of reports, including in the UK, about poor housing quality and how this is affecting our population. And so I've become more interested in a way in existing buildings and how do we evaluate the risks in those and then remediate them. One of the ways in which I have looked at this topic has been through the Act Early project. This was a 5-year project that has only been recently completed because we've had an extension that was looking at upstream determinants of childhood health inequalities. So it was funded by a conglomeration of funding bodies called UK Prevention Research Partnership, and led by Professor John Wright at Bradford. It was looking at 2 test beds, Tower Hamlets in London and Bradford in Yorkshire, using a systems thinking approach across a number of themes. I was part of the Healthy Places team, led by Professor Nicola Christie and Laura Bone at UCL. I was co-leading the housing sub-theme with Professor Nicholas Please from York. We had quite a job because initially we were told you need to evaluate interventions, but interventions in housing are they take a long time to realize, both in terms of the intervention itself and then the effect on health itself. But one of the projects that I led within that was a mixed methods project looking at the interactions between housing and neighborhood environments. A lot of research is either on housing or on neighborhoods, but not a lot on the two. And amongst other things, we noted that in Tower Hamlets in particular, overcrowding came up as a big issue that was affecting children and their families. We co-produced a research brief with the local authority and with our local partners that was really emphasizing what our research was telling us. The existing metrics that are used to characterize overcrowding in buildings do not always capture all of the ways in which overcrowding affects health and well-being. The metrics I mean are, for example, the bedroom standard, which, as you may know, is used by several local authorities in different guises to understand where people could be on the housing waiting list. And then later on, I was a co-investigator in a project led by Jess Sheringham, funded by NIHR, which has only been recently completed, a mixed method study looking at combining data to identify families at risk of the harmful health effects of housing. So there was a qualitative component looking at the system of how overcrowding could affect health and well-being, but also identifying the leverages point, because the whole point about metrics is that if you focus on the bedroom standard, then you're thinking about the number of bedrooms, the number of this and that, but you're thinking this in a broader way, then perhaps you can leverage it in a different way. The project also has a quantitative component led by Laura Scott at Islington Council, where they are using their own data sets and publicly available data sets to help identify households at risk. I will not attempt to describe these because I will do a very poor job, but if you have questions, ask Jess. Ongoing work. Very excited to be involved in an NIHR-funded project led by Born in Bradford, starting in July, and this is evaluating the net zero retrofit and health. So again, this perfect example of these trade-offs. So on one hand, when you do retrofit in homes, you're trying to, for example, make it easier and cheaper to heat up the property, so reducing fuel poverty, increasing temperature, and that could be a positive impact on cardiorespiratory health, mental health. But if it's not done correctly, you could end up not doing ventilation right, build up of indoor air quality or indoor pollutants, and then there could be negative impacts, for example, on respiratory health. And more broadly, you do the retrofit thinking that it's going to turn out in one way, but all of the stakeholders then have different ideas of how it will turn out. Also involved in a Lancet series on health equity in cities. This is a multi-author, multi-international series led by UCL, by David Osrin and Professor David Osrin and Haim Jacobi at UCL. We are at the beginning of the process, and I see Lucy is also in the room. So we are really getting our heads together, first of all, to understand what is health equity in cities, etc. There might be a book on health and retrofit. You know, let's wait and see. And also, as part of my work of co-chairing the CIBSI Health and Wellbeing Working Group, we are producing guidance on health and well-being and net zero, and we think that the guidance might be published in the second quarter of 2026, depending on what the reviewers think. I could not have a talk without mentioning partnerships and knowledge exchange. I will mention some of key partners involved. The UK Indoor Environments Group, UKIEG, of which I've been a committee member since 2006. I was a chair until 2017. We had one of our past chair, Derek Crump, in the room. And of course, Sani is now our current chair, and she will tell us all about UKIEG, so I won't say no more. I've already mentioned CIBSI and my role of co-chairing together with Milena Stjokovic from Atkins Realis. I'm a board member for the Alliance for Sustainable Building Products and an advisory group member of the All-Party Parliamentary Group, Healthy Homes and Buildings. So hopefully you can see that I am trying to be a voice of healthy, sustainable buildings across industry, policy and practice. Of course, then change can be difficult for a number of reasons. So I've told you a bit about my research trajectory. You know, I've gone from being house dust mite geek and movie star, low-fat buildings with a generous sprinkles of well-being, and now trying to really focus on, okay, how do we square the scale here? Health and equity, carbon counting. It's very frustrating, I find, that in the net zero arena, a lot of the work is then reduced to carbon counting. And in doing so, then we lose some of the details. But some reflections. I've talked about the synergies, and now the important thing is understanding what are the drivers to balance these scales that we're looking at. Health-based guidelines are extremely important. This is one of the problems with damp and mold at the moment, right? That, you know, we got ways of measuring mold, then how does it translate in the health risks, for example? But most importantly, we need to identify commonly understood and agreed metrics across different stakeholders. And in order to do so, interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary co-production with stakeholders is key. Size matters and silver bullets, I've already talked about that. You know, we are fixated on the silver bullets, but they rarely exist. And of course, the importance considering behavior and society. So in essence, I would say that we do know the essential ingredients for healthy and sustainable buildings, design and operation. We even know a few recipes. What we're struggling with as a society, as a researchers at the moment, is then understand how we should agree on finding the resources to fund the recipes. And so we end up, the research at the moment ends up either trying to document all of the damage that is done by poor quality buildings and remediate the effects of societal inequalities and environmental economic pressures, rather than looking at the agenda in a completely different ways. How can we use buildings to really foster well-being? Right? And so rather than looking at, okay, what are the minimum level of environmental hazards that are suitable? What should we do to strive for well-being? So I'll leave you with the extracts from the WHO Constitution. The first one, very well-known definition of health. The second one, maybe slightly less known, the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health is one of the fundamental rights of every human being, without distinction of race, religion, political belief, economic or social condition. And that's me, my passion coming through, because I become emotional and I don't know why. But anyway, so that's my mission, and thank you very much.
Let's give Marcella another round of applause. Fabulous presentation. Thank you so much. That was high value for all of us in the audience, Marcella. Thank you so much. You said some things which really resonate with me. You talked about collaborations, partnerships, and you told us what you learned all along, and you're still learning now. This is about knowledge creation. It is about working together. And what I also like very much is that you never gave up working on the difficult bits, right? Because there is this interest in looking for the easy answers. There is this interest in looking for the easy solutions, but you don't go there, okay? You choose to work at the interstices, and that's where the challenge is, that's where the high value research is, and that's what you've dedicated your career to. So thank you, grazie, for that.